There's 7 questions that I've come up with that people think they know the answer to, that they might know something about until they're asked. Then all of a sudden, it gets a little bit deeper. Hi, welcome back. In the last segment, we talked about the awesome, the mighty little grain of sand, and hopefully that made an impression on you. You got an idea just what goes into a grain of sand, as opposed to just looking at it as like a little piece of dust. Maybe it's got a little bit more meaning to you now. It does to me anyway, and it really it lends a lot of creative, imaginative thinking regarding what God has done with the creation, because the creation is so amazing. There's so many wonderful. In fact, we'll talk about that someday. The physical constants that have to exist in the universe in order for anything to be here at all. And the same thing with human beings. The things that have to be inside of a human being just for anything at all to go right in the first place, especially down at the cellular level. So someday we'll talk about that. But for today, coming off of the grain of sand, which I'm going to assume that most of you did not know that there were so many atoms in the grain of sand. I don't think it might win you the piece of pie in Trivial Pursuit one day, but it's not the kind of thing that people spend a lot of time thinking about. But I'd like to go over 7 questions that probably you should think about from time to time, because they're making a great difference, an impact in our society. The way our children are being brought up, the things that they hear and the things that they're being asked to believe, and all sorts of things. So there's 7 questions that I've come up with that people think they know the answer to, that they might know something about until they're asked. Then all of a sudden, it gets a little bit deeper. And I'd like to share those with you today, so when we can move into the final question that I'm going to have for you, and what we're going to talk about probably 2 segments from now, you'll be all set. The first question I have, and when I'm with people, I always encourage them not to blurt out the first thing that comes to mind, because usually the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about these 7 things is wrong, and you'll see why in a moment. So think about this for a moment as we talk about it. But the first question I'll ask people when I talk about my specific 7 questions is I'll ask them, what is time? What is time? And at first, people kind of have sort of an internal thing. And they say, oh, I know what time is. That's like you're watching the hands on a clock pass. It's 8 o'clock when you watch it, the minute hand goes around, now it's 8:01. If you wait long enough, it's 8:15. You wait too long, you're late for work, right? So people have this sort of passive idea of what time is, but that's not any kind of a definition of time. That's just an outward manifestation of what time looks like when it's being represented by something. But if I ask you specifically, what is time? What is it? Then you can't answer. And if you think you can answer, then I'm going to tell you, and I mean this in all politeness, I mean, you're wrong, because nobody knows what time is. In fact, just by way of showing, I have 3 books. I couldn't find the other one. It's in a box down in the basement. I apologize. But this is a book written by the magnificent Professor Paul Davies. It's called About Time. Well, by the way, I've met Professor Davies on a couple of occasions. I went to see him lecture at Chicago State University on the South Side. Hey, he's a great guy. He's just as humble as a little church mouse, and he's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. So I bought his book on About Time, and I was hoping that it was going to tell me what time was. And I found out that by the end of the book, Professor Davies admitted, he said, I can't tell you what time is. I don't know. So they know a lot about the things that surround this idea that we know as time, but he cannot tell you what time is. So a whole book about time, and I didn't get a definition. That was one. Then, running out of ideas, Adam Frank produced a book, and it was called About Time. Magnificent physicist that he is. He wrote a book called About Time, and in the end, it was just like Professor Davies' book, and he says, I can't tell you what time is. He took a whole book to tell you about time and conclude that he didn't know what it was. In the basement, I have yet another book by another famous physicist called About Time, and it was the same conclusion. So what I learned out of all this, a bit following my 4 principles of the learning process, I became unconsciously competent, and I realized I'm not buying any more books called About Time unless I go to the last chapter first and he gives me an answer. So until they figure out what it is, I'm not going to buy any more books. There's even a guy, he cleverly tried to, and this was a great book, by the way. I would recommend this book to folks. All you have to have is basically maybe a high school level algebra background, and then this book is easy street. Okay, it's well written. But Richard Muller's book called The Physics of Time, and he explained very well about the physics of time, but then he couldn't tell me what it was that time actually is. Couldn't do it. So I know that the theoretical physicists cannot tell me what time is. And if they can't tell me what time is, I assure you, you can't either. And nor can I. I can't answer the question. All I can do is acknowledge that it exists. And I can acknowledge that in order for God to be God, God exists out of this thing that we call time, because he sees the end from the beginning. We can't imagine seeing the end of something. Half of the time we've forgotten what happened in the past. We're living in the present, whatever that means. That's kind of scary too when you really look at it. But God lives outside of time. Now, how do I know that? Because he created it. God created the entire construct of time. So therefore, he cannot be captured by it. He's outside of it. And this leads to a lot of interesting theological premises that you'll see in the Bible as well. But that's a story for another day. So what is time? That's something that's worth considering, and you don't know it, and you can be the star of parties when you pull that one out. The next thing I ask people, because I'm just a curious guy, and I asked myself these questions many, many years ago. I asked myself, what is energy? Well, what is energy? Do you know that nobody can tell you what energy is? They can tell you a lot of things about the nature, let's say, between matter and energy, but they can't tell you exactly what it is. Matter and energy are 2 sides of the same coin. You can take matter and convert it into energy, and by the way, energy never ceases to exist. It's something that's always there from the moment God said in the beginning. He created the heavens and the earth. When God created the heavens and the earth, this is when matter came into existence, hence energy. It's very interesting. The Bible is very deep in theoretical physics if you just know how to look at it. But they don't know what energy is, and they can't create it, and they can't get rid of it. All they can do is use it for, in this case, for the betterment of mankind, hopefully. Every now and then, we use it to create a bomb. Okay, maybe some possible purposes for the bomb, but in general speaking, we use it. We take gasoline, right? Gasoline goes into your combustion engine and your car moves. You have a nuclear power plant, and from the nuclear power plant comes the necessary energy that spins turbines, and turbines do all sorts of work, and the next thing you know, you've got power being spread out to entire counties, you see. So fusion energy is now literally here. I couldn't have said this 10, 20 years, I couldn't have said this 3 years ago. But fusion energy is coming. We don't know what energy is, but we certainly do know how to use it. And fusion energy is going to change the nature of life on planet Earth, I assure you. If you've seen Spider-Man, what was it? Spider-Man 2 or something with Dr. Ock, and he had the little mini sun in his lab, right? Well, he was dabbling with the nuclear fusion at that point in time, but that's actually become a reality now, and they can use it for profit. So it's very interesting. You keep an eye on that. The next thing I'll ask people, and boy, do they think that they know what this one is. I'll ask people, what is life? And what I mean by what is life and what is a person. Wrap those two together with a bow. What is life? What is a person? You're going to get some interesting answers on that, depending on with whom you're speaking, you see. So if you're speaking with a Christian, 9 times out of 10, I hope 9 times out of 10, maybe I'm wrong. Let me know if you think maybe it's 7 out of 10 these days. I don't know, but I do know that the landscape is changing a bit. But for the most part, Christians believe that a life and or a person is created at the moment of conception. And that's it. So no need to make it any more complex than that. A person comes into being with its own identity, with all of the information that person needs to become who you have become, is there resident at the moment that life is created. And this is an amazing thing. Of course, we argue about that now. We don't want to admit, not we Christians, I think by and large Christian community is pretty clear on this, but the world is trying to redefine the nature of what a person is, so that, of course, unfortunately, a person can become expendable if it's not desired. And that's a tragedy in our age. It is a tragedy that we think so little of the imago Dei, the image of God, that we allow this to be expendable with barely a second thought. So that's also probably a subject for another day. But what is life? What is a person? I have a molecular biology background. And when I look at the interesting and amazing little things going on inside the cell, they're one of my favorite characters in the cell, and I regret I don't have this available to you right now, is a kinesin or a dynein, Kinesin, or a dynein, Dyn, If you look these things up, these are magnificent little things that have feet, and they have a body, and they have a little gripper, and they go about the cell cleaning things up and bringing things to the outer membrane and spitting them out there and then going back and finding more garbage in the cell, and the whole process keeps repeating until the second law of thermodynamics basically gets the best of them, and they break down like anything else breaks down in life, and the something inside the cell called the ribosome produces another one as needed. It's an amazing self-contained system. And some might argue, I might even argue, only in a cartoonish sort of way, that is life, because that thing is resisting death. And I almost wonder, I don't have an answer to this, but I almost wonder if the key to life is anything that resists death. This is very abstract, and these are conversations that philosophers and theologians have been having for ages. But what I can assure you about what is life and what is a person, I can assure you, is that most people, certainly, you will not find a unanimous consensus on that. You won't. I wish it were so. I wish people did know what a person, what life was, but it's not unanimous. For hundreds of thousands of years, people have debated this. So, but for Christians, for us today, I don't want to debate it. To me, life begins at conception. A person is created at conception, and everything that person needs to become mature, and which is, of course, left alone to its own dictates. It's going to be born, it's going to mature, it's going to die. But everything that person needs to be, that person is there, present at the moment of conception. I just, for the life of me, can't see how that's not a person in everyone's eyes. And I hate to sound all Dr. Seuss about it, but it's true. A person is a person, no matter how small. 4, and I think we can get in one more before 15 minutes hits. What is consciousness? If you think about that for just a second, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking it's the thoughts inside of my mind. And of course, you're right. You're right. But what is it? What is this thing that we call consciousness? Here's a little secret for you. There is nobody in the biomedical field, nobody in the theoretical physics field, practical physics field, any field of any kind in the sciences that will tell you that they know what consciousness is. It's absolutely a mystery. For the Christian, not so much. For the Christian, there's a unique relationship. Paul will teach us in, I believe it's 1 Timothy, that we're a tripartite being. We're a body, soul, and a spirit. And the soul of your particular being, all right, of your that 1/3 of your tripartite nature is in fact your consciousness. And that consciousness, and I think that basically even the atheists are starting to pick up on this. They're realizing that this thing might be transferable. And so the humanists are, if you ever hear the phrase transhumanism, this is exactly what they're talking about, preserving their consciousness, let's say, just for the sake of a simple example, onto a hard drive, and in awaiting for a future point in time when that consciousness can be transferred into something more permanent. That's not a joke. I know Bezos from Amazon is desperately looking not to die. He wants to preserve his consciousness completely as it is in hopes that he will live immortally. But you will live immortally. That's the thing. I'm not too worried about living immortally. I know I'm going to live immortally, and you should too. Okay. So, but your consciousness is that one aspect of your tripartite being. The other one is your spirit. God has a spirit. And by the way, when you leave this life for the next, if you're a Christian, friends, if you're a Christian, you leave this life for that, that spirit is going to have been born of incorruptible seed. It's going to be reunited with a consciousness that's no longer attached to a fallen body of flesh. And you are going to be, for the first time in your existence, you are going to be a perfect version of you. And that's an amazing concept. You have to let that sink in. Right now, we're at 15 minutes, but right now you are sitting in a body of flesh. You do have a spirit, whether it's fallen or it's not. If you're not saved, you don't have a saved spirit. You're saved, you do have a saved spirit, but we all share the body and the consciousness together on this plane of living. And by this plane of living, I mean just pumping air here on planet Earth. Okay? So what is consciousness? The answer to that is nobody knows yet, but they do recognize that it's something very important. It's possibly transferable, which of course, as a Christian, I agree with completely. You're going to take your consciousness with you when you leave this life for the next. And so these are things that, especially the unsaved world with no hope for the future, unlike us, I have hope, I have faith, I have belief that I'm going to live forever, and I'm going to live in this mystical place called heaven, and I'm going to live with my Savior, my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and I'm going to find out all about the mysteries of the universe at that point in time. But until then, I'm going to be content working them out here on planet Earth. So let's stop for now, and we'll see you in the next segment.